The Warlock's obsession, the shadow stir. Alexander never considered himself special. A man of discipline, he focused on his craft, his work, and his faith. Yet, in the unseen world, his light burned too bright to blinding for those who thrived in the shadows. It started subtly. A growing unease, whispers in the wind that had no source. His closest friend and ex, once loyal and steadfast, turned distant, deceitful, and a thief. He caught her, red-handed, taking what was not hers. When confronted, she spun a web of lies, denying her betrayal even as she clutched stolen mail in her hands, mail that carried vital information meant for Alexander. Along with his energy, she siphoned away his good fortune, returning to her ex-husband to share all she had stolen. If Alexander had been the problem, then why did her troubles remain? Reality had its own way of revealing truth. In retaliation, she launched a vicious smear campaign, determined to destroy his reputation before he could expose hers. His business deals fell apart for reasons that made no sense. His dog, usually protective, whined at unseen presences in the corners of his home. He had always known that spiritual warfare was real, but he never imagined that he would be at the center of a full-fledged assault. The coven's plan. A coven had gathered against him, orchestrated by a woman scorned. Tina, a high priestess of the dark arts. She once sought his attention, craving his power and presence. When Alexander rejected her, she did not take it lightly. Her desire twisted into hatred, and with it, she called upon forces beyond human comprehension. Tina was not alone. A warlock named Azrael, a man steeped in ancient rituals and blood magic, joined her. Together, they devised a cruel strategy. If Alexander would not bow, he would break. They wove spell after spell, destruction, confusion, isolation. And when none of it worked, they turned to the dead, death at the door. The graveyard dirt had been cast, the incantation spoken. Alexander felt it immediately. A sudden weight in his chest, like unseen hands pressing down. Shadows moved in his peripheral vision, and his dreams turned into battlegrounds. The attack escalated. The air in his home turned thick with the stench of decay. His breath became labored at night, as if something invisible was trying to steal it away. When he looked in the mirror, his once strong reflection appeared gaunt and exhausted. This was not fatigue, this was siphoning. They were trying to drain his life force. But Alexander was not an ordinary man. His lineage carried divine protection, and his soul was not easily taken. The war of the spirit. He knew he had to fight back. The first step was severance, cutting off every energetic tie they had to him. He burned everything she had ever given him, renounced every soul tie, and called on the divine to shield him. The room trembled as his prayers ascended, pushing back the unseen forces clawing at his existence. The second step was reflection. Who had betrayed him? Who was feeding these spirits access to his energy? He traced it back. Tina had infiltrated his circle, whispering lies into the ears of those once loyal to him. He closed every door, shutting out the weak links who had unknowingly become conduits for his enemies. The third step was retaliation, not in the physical, but in the spirit. Alexander knew better than to cast back what was sent to him. Instead, he called judgment upon them. He asked the heavens to turn their own magic upon them. And the answer came swiftly. The backfire. Tina's health declined first. Her beauty, once enchanting, withered away as sickness took hold. Her spells began to fail, her influence fading like a dying flame. Azrael, arrogant in his craft, was struck with visions of the horrors he had unleashed. He wandered the city in a daze, tormented by shadows that once obeyed him. The death magic they had summoned had found new targets, its original senders. The final stand. One night, the final attack came. Alexander awoke to a suffocating darkness, an entity towering over his bed. It was an incubus, summoned to destroy him from the inside out. But he was ready. Summoning every ounce of divine power within him, he called upon the sacred name of the Most High. The air crackled, and the entity shrieked, its form contorting as it was forced out. The walls of his room trembled. And then, silence. The battle was over. Victory and judgment. Days later, news reached Alexander. Azrael had been found wandering in a graveyard, muttering incoherently. Tina had disappeared from public view, her once feared reputation now a whisper of the past. The coven had collapsed, their power shattered. Alexander stood in the light of the rising sun, breathing in the fresh air. He had survived. No, he had won. And the warlocks and witches, who had come for him. They had learned a lesson they would never forget. Not all men are prey, some are warriors. And when you come against the protected, you are the one who falls.